Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're doing something kind of different here today. I've been asked by a few people actually to do this, so I said, hey, why not? So, what does a tray, toothpicks, cotton swabs, paint brushes, crafting knives, baby wipes, and well, a before and after, so to speak, of the Fall Cybertron Jazz all have in common? Good question. We're going to use all of these things as part of the tools of the trade when I spend some time today talking about a little bit of a how-to video, I guess you could say. This is sort of a beginner's guide for Transformers customization. Something that, you know, a lot of people do, and a lot of people do very high end, and something that people have thought about, wondered about if they could do it themselves, and, you know, would like to test some stuff out without really having to make a huge investment or take a giant risk. Well, I'm going to kind of endeavor here to show you what I do with a lot of my customs and what you might be able to try doing with yours as well. So stick around. We're going to do a review of a bunch of things here that you know, could be used, how well or how not well they work, and I guess we can call this a bit of a GotBot true how-to, or a do-it-yourself. I'm not really sure, but you get the idea. Stick around, we're going to start the tutorial in just a few seconds. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, share. Check out Machinery of Man, the Everything Factor. Have a look at Universal Collision. As of this recording, I just put up part 1 of the season finale for season 1. And I was a little bit delayed on doing that. It was a heck of an episode to do. Check me out everywhere, and please, you know, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. So I have a whole table worth of things here to look at. So where do we begin? Well, I'm going to try to sort of do this kind of a piece at a time. I thought about doing a series of videos on this, and I decided, no, you know what, I'm going to kind of address all of it, you know, in one fell swoop here and now. So I'm going to take this off. We're going to come back and start off with, I guess, you know, part A here of talking about this stuff. Okay, so let's begin with cutting and shaping. And you might say, okay, well, what are you cutting and shaping? Let me give you some examples so that we know exactly what we're talking about here. I shave down plastic on, for example, the shoulder pieces of, actually the connector pieces for Blitzwing and Generations Blitzwing and Double Dealer. And now their shoulders lock. You can rotate them all the way around. They work absolutely fine. Not too long ago, in episode 268, I had turned Nightbeat into an actual headmaster, and I did it when I shaved down you know, the area inside of his neck and put in a Titan Master connector piece. I Titan Master, Headmastered Blur. This guy right here. I looked at Blur in full in episode, let's see. 172, I believe it was. No, 138. 138, and I looked at the G1 version of Blur in episode 172, and I looked at and discussed the custom paint that I did on this guy in episode 271. But you can see I cut out this section here so that if you put the legs of the Titan Master out, it slides right through it. You never even have to remove the head for any reason. So again, I had to cut out space here. And sometimes it's not even plastic that you want to cut out. Sometimes you have a label that you want to apply, which is, you know, I guess paper or whatever stickers are made out of, whatever that stickery stuff is. Like this, you know, Decepticon symbol right here. It had a very thick white border. So, of course, I wanted to cut that off. Actually, I didn't do it. Starscream Girlfriend did it. She is just a little more, detail-oriented? Maybe that's not it. She's a little, her hand is a little steadier for doing stuff like that. There you go. So, you know, it got cut out, it got applied, and I think it looks great on Hegemon's chest. I looked at him in full in episode 133. So taking him out of it. What would I use to do cutting? Well, a few things. And actually, I'm missing one. Sometimes you want to shave pieces down, and that, you know, in shaving them down, that means you only want to remove a very little bit. I also did it with the feet. Actually, I wasn't going to show this here, but I will, since I have him here. The very, very, very heavy ratchets on the feet of Computron now work a lot easier. The ratchet is still there, but not as in-depth. Because the first tool of the trade, sandpaper. Sandpaper works great on plastic. You don't need too heavy of a grain. I mean, it's plastic. Take a little piece, sometimes a very small piece, sand away at it. It might rough it up a bit, might rough up the edges a bit naturally, but usually what roughs up is something that you are, you know, screwing back together, so it's not something that you're kind of readily, usually going to see. And if you do see it, then I guess that's when you introduce custom paint work. But sandpaper is your friend when you only want to remove a millimeter or two. Something very small, or you have a very rough edge that you want to smooth out. Sandpaper can also help there. Like I said, with the feet pieces for Computron, I still wanted the ratchet to be there, and maybe you can hear that. But without that done, when I would tilt his foot, like a lot of people, I had trouble with the legs kind of coming apart a bit. I didn't want that. And since I didn't want that, you know, I wanted to find a way to fix it, so I just, you know, went underneath here, took out these two screws. This whole piece, just red piece here, comes out. This is a section in the center that you take out, you sand down, you put it all back together, put the two screws in, and boom. Now his ankles tilt great, and I don't have any issue with the legs coming apart at all. The second thing to use, believe it or not, though, to be fair, you want to be cutting something that is a fair size, scissors. Now, these are big, I admit that. Starscream Girlfriend actually has a little pair of crafting scissors. They have a very pointy tip, they're very small, very good for detail-oriented work, like that Decepticon symbol. A lot of people will say to use a rotary tool. If you own a rotary tool, hey, that's great. It can shave stuff down, it can cut stuff off, and does it very nice and clean. I don't own one. I haven't gone out and bought one, largely because it's an investment that I don't really feel, I don't know, ready to make or that I need to make. Instead, I use a crafting knife. Now, there are lots of types of crafting knives. I suggest one that's this sort of style with this sharp tip and sharp blade. I use this for Blur. I used it for Nightbeat. Obviously, the thicker the plastic, the more challenging it is. That being said, be very, very, very careful with these. You know, kids, get help from an adult. Adults, be very careful. I have cut myself and poked myself many, many times with this. It's an excellent tool, but you have to be very responsible in using it. I've used it for, like I said, that stuff there. I've also used it, and this one was quite a risk on my behalf. And I looked at the figure I'm about to show you in full in episode 149 and the custom work I did in episode 150. And it's this guy here. It's Computron. And can I even back this up more? Maybe. And I got rid of the faceplate and gave him an actual face. If you want to see that a bit better, like I said, you can, check out my full look at this guy. So you can use something like a crafting knife to do this stuff. I shaved off parts of the faceplate. I really just pushed in on it and wiggled it a bit to make the mouth. Used a very small piece of sandpaper to kind of shape out a nose. It's not a perfect face, but it's certainly better than the faceplate that was there. A lot of people would say, hey, if you want stuff remolded, why not just get a different version? You could certainly do that. But you know what? We already had these tools handy, and picking up something like a bit of sandpaper or a little crafting tool, it's a cheap alternative. If you're a beginner, and I know that there are people that would see me point this stuff out and say, hey, don't use that, use this. And you're not wrong, you're completely right. There are tools that are better, but they also require a bit more of an investment. If you're a beginner and you're just looking to kind of test out your skills, refine your skills, these sort of tools are cheap alternatives that are easy to get. So that's where I would begin for cutting and shaving. So we're going to move on now to, I guess, section B, which is going to kind of talk a little bit about a topic that I have addressed in another video. And say hello to our very good friend, the cotton swab. And you might say, what are you going to use a cotton swab for? Joint thickening. You hear a lot of times, you've heard me talk about it, where I have loose joints, loose ball joints or loose hinges. It's not something that really works if a figure is loose at an area where it's pinned, but I've had it work great on hinges, excellent on ball joints, and really what you do is you get yourself some floor polish. That's what everybody says. Actually, what it is a floor care finish. It's a multi-surface floor care finish. If you want to know exactly what I'm talking about, exactly what the label for what I use is, all of that stuff, I looked at it when I discussed some custom work that I did on my Evasion Mode Optimus Prime. I looked at Optimus in full in episode 64. I discussed how to thicken some joints on him, which I did, and how I made his custom faceplate using really an old file folder and some sticky tack and some super strong adhesive, some very strong glue in episode 72. So you can, like I said, you can see exactly how the floor polish fix kind of works there. It is fantastic. Some people say to use clear nail polish. You sure can. There's no doubt about it. I've heard that that's not great for plastics. Some people say to use some sort of a strong glue. Again, you can. I've heard that's not great for plastics, but the floor finish does, work very well, and it works great on plastics because it doesn't break them down. And you're probably going to have to do a couple of applications, either pour a little bit out in some sort of a container, or you know what, maybe you can just dip the cotton swab into it. And then smear it all around the ball joint or smear it all around the hinge. You're going to have to let it dry. The longer you let it dry, the better. Like I said, if you find that it's not tight enough, add another layer, let that dry. Some people will say, hey, you got to take the figure apart. It helps if you pop off a shoulder or pop off a leg. You know, you can take the finish and put it all around, say, a ball joint, and then the hole that the ball joint goes into, also smear it around in there. Try to build it up, basically. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a build up. And once it's done and dried and put back together, it tends to make a significant difference. I looked at the RID Starscream, and I don't like that figure because right out of the package, taking it out of the plastic clamshell, his legs fell off the ball joints. That's how loose they were. I put on, I think it was about 4 coats of the finish, and honestly, I ended up kind of giving him to the scraplets, and his legs stay on fine through a lot of play. It's a great little trick. It's a great thing you can do to make your figures more sturdy. And all you need is, some cleaner, basically, that costs $7, $5 to $7, and something that most people have pretty much in their household, I would suspect, a cotton swab. Simple fix. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next part. And what am I going to do for the next part? I don't know. We'll see what comes up in part C in just a second. Okay, so I guess you know by now what we're doing here. It's going to be adhesives and like clear coat, or at least clear coat nail polish. Okay, a couple of things here. Adhesives, they can work well. If you're using them sparingly, and I'll say responsibly. I pointed out how I cut things down inside here so that I could put in the Titan Master port. I got the Titan Master port by cutting it off of the Titan Master Night Beat. And I did use a very strong glue. There are lots of kinds out there. I can't really give any sort of a recommendation, but we all know the sort of strong glues that work for us. And now, honestly, I can pick this up really by the Titan Master thing and shake it and it doesn't come out. The head fits in here nicely. Actually, I guess I have that kind of in behind, don't I? I can pick this up by the Titan Master port thing, and it stays, the head fits in nicely. It's easy to get out. I don't feel like I'm going to pull it out or anything, but I only used a little bit because if your adhesive is strong enough, you're not going to need a lot of it. I also used only a very little bit when I'd done the faceplate here of Prime. Like I explained before, I used a little piece of a file folder. I initially kind of slapped it on his face there with just some, I don't even know what to call it. You see it used in schools. I've seen it when it's white or pink or blue. It's malleable and sticky, and I'm going to call it like a sticky tack type of substance. I really don't know what you call it, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. And it was something I put in behind the little piece of plastic, put it on his face. Then I use, again, very strong adhesive and done a coat on the outside using, because it's easy to kind of glop on glue. So I found the best way to kind of give a nice smooth covering of the glue on such a little place like the faceplate was to use a toothpick. I was able to kind of coat that up a few times in glue, and smear it on his face. And of course, after I had that done, I put on the silver paint on the faceplate, and silver paint. Whoa, boy, is that something difficult to work with. But I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. So adhesives work great. Use them responsibly. Don't overuse too much, because you're going to end up having it look sloppy. Okay, part number 4, or part D? Yeah, D, that's what we're using. We're using letters, right? Yeah, letters. So part D, we're going to look at how to deal with clear plastic. Oh, but before I go on with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the clear nail polish here. Again, some people would use something like this to thicken up joints. I find that it works best in extremely small quantities because it tends to go on thick. So use it in extremely small quantities. Use the brush that comes with it to really kind of smooth it out as best as you can. And I would only use it to kind of do some top coating of paint that you want to protect a bit better. Now, yeah, you can actually get sealers, you know, things that are spray, things that are brush on, and they cost a bit more. A top coat of nail polish is effective if you're not planning to play with it a lot and just display it on the shelf. It's probably going to give it a fairly high gloss sheen, and it does dry well. The issue with things like spray sealers and whatnot is that they don't always tend to dry well, and I've heard of certain cases where they actually smear the paintwork you've done. I've never had an issue, assuming I let the paintwork dry long enough, I've never had an issue where using this has smeared anything. And I did use it on the shoulders here. They were blue, naturally. I painted them red and touched them up a few times over the years. But I haven't had any issues since I put the clear nail polish coat on over them. So I think it works well for that. And I know I said earlier that clear nail polish isn't great on plastic. Be very careful using it. I just put it on top of the extra paint that I added. I made very sure that it didn't actually touch the plastic. It was something that I applied only to those painted areas. And granted, do I know yet if it will have an effect on the plastic? Well, I've had this done on him and some others for a good year or more, and I haven't had any issues, any weakness, any fragility. If I ever do, I'll update, I'll let you know. Okay, now on to dealing with clear plastic. All right, let's plow through here. We have looked at, in part A, talking about kind of cutting and shaping, and I mentioned there how usually those are pieces that go back together. If you were, for example, to want to shave down the more squared off shoulders of Cup here, you would, and by the way, I've looked at Cup a whole bunch of times if you've been kind of following the channel, most recently in episode 271. But if you wanted to shave those down and try to round them off, for example, with sandpaper, you certainly could, but you're definitely going to have to paint it. There's no doubt about it. I don't think that it's really worth that. I think that the paint work is kind of good. But what did bother me with this guy, and other people have dealt with it, and I had to do some research on it, was his clear chest. It was perfectly clear. You could see everything inside, and I thought to myself, well, do I paint it? Do I paint it on the inside? I tried a couple of things with that. I tried affixing tin foil. I tried painting the inside, well, testing to paint the inside of the windshield silver. None of that seemed to work. So I decided that I just wanted to do two things. One, I wanted to remove the plastic on his upper chest and kind of get the windshield as close up to his neck, as close up to his head as possible for animation accuracy. The other thing that I wanted to do was kind of rough up the inside so that it was sort of hazy and foggy and you didn't just see inside perfectly. So how did I accomplish that? Well, doing the windshield was easy. I opened up his chest like this, and inside here I actually took again, our dear friend sandpaper, and just started roughing up the plastic and roughing up the plastic, and kept doing that until it was the way I liked it. First I started doing, you know, straight up and down motion. Of course that looked streaky. Once I kind of had it really roughed up from that, then I started doing circular motions, which I think worked out really well. You can still of course see through it a bit because it's so close to the bits that are folded up inside of his torso, but it's not that perfectly clear. The harder part was dealing with this up here, our clear plastic. So what did I do? Well, there's a lot of options. You can of course use paint thinners and stuff. Some people have mentioned using some sort of a nail polish remover, but warn about the acetone breaking down the plastic. I personally use rubbing alcohol. I opened up this the section so that I wouldn't get it back on plastic up around his neck, around his arms. So I, again, had this opened, did I have it open up? Maybe I didn't have it opened up. I basically took our dear friend the cotton swab here, and I basically took some rubbing alcohol, soaked the cotton swab in the rubbing alcohol, started rubbing on the paint, and rubbing on it and rubbing on it. I'm not gonna lie, that is a tumultuous procedure. It took me about 2 hours or so of pretty intense scrubbing to get it off, and really a fair amount of rubbing alcohol, but you have to be really careful where you apply it. Rubbing alcohol can break down plastic, especially the more rigid clear plastic. So after I had the paint off the way that I wanted it, of course my hands had rubbing alcohol on it, his windshield did, up around the body a little bit did. So the first thing I did was I took a baby wipe and I used one of those to really kind of clean off the outside, clean off the inside, wipe all around the plastics. Then I ran it under hot water, used a bit of soap, and scrubbed on it some more. Then I used another one of these after the fact and wiped around it again, and finally I dried it all off. I've had this done to him now a good, I'd say, if I was to guess, I would say between month to 2 months. I have not had any issues, any stress marks or cracks or anything. It works great, but you want to be careful with it and make sure that you remove any excess after you're done. So that's where the you know, the baby wipes, the cotton swab, and another place for sandpaper to come into play. Okay, let's get into the real meat of this. Now that we've looked at all of those tips, let's talk big. Let's talk about paint. But before I look at that kind of in general, I want to talk specifically about silver paint, because that can be tricky. Okay, so part E, I think we're on part E here. I said I want to talk about silver paint. And you can see that I have it done on Braun's knees here. I looked at Braun in full pretty recently in episode 270. I used silver on Optimus's faceplate. This is the, whether you want to call him the Age of Extinction or the Last Night Dinobot Slug, I think is the name that he goes by now. I've done him with a lot of silver on the body here, as you can see. I'm going to tell you now, this was actually the Age of Extinction version. I looked at him in full. In fact, I looked at all of my custom Dinobots in full, ranging from episodes 65 to 71, which is part of the reason why for the last night I'm not actually going to be looking at this guy again. You can check out my earlier thoughts about this mold, because even if I got that one, I would honestly just do this with it again. Also, you'll notice a little bit of an alternate storage here behind his legs for his swords that would go pegged in the side. I digress. I want to talk about silver paint. Silver is challenging to work with. It's challenging to work with for a couple of reasons. The first is because you need one that will cure well, and silver doesn't always like to cure well. It likes to rub off unless you leave it for a long time, often. There are ones that people will often say are better ones. I've stuck to honestly using paint pens for my silver, and a lot of times even with the paint pens, I'll put it on, I'll put a line of silver on. For example, if I was doing the body of this guy, I would probably take my silver paint pen here, I would paint a bunch of silver on it, then I would take my silver brush, which is specifically this brush, it always kind of has silver on it, and I would brush it on. I would do a few coats depending on the coverage I wanted. With this guy, I wanted it to be rougher. Same thing with my Generations Megatron that I've been using in Universal Collision. I wanted the paint job to look rough and scuffed up and I guess a version of heavy scratch, but so I put less on. I wanted Optimus's to be a little more uniform, so I put more on. Same with Braun. I wanted his to be more uniform, so I put a couple of thicker coats on. Took longer to dry. I've used pens that work and pens that don't work. I've tried different types of silvers. Find what works for you. Like, I used a paint pen once called, I think it was Malatow. I'm not sure the name, but it didn't work really well. Honestly, the best thing, in my experience, that I have found that works is you can buy them in sets of 5 paint pens. They're just called Painters paint pens, and you can get them at different department stores and whatnot. That's where I got mine. And I honestly find the silver with the chisel head from that set works really well and cures pretty quickly, and isn't like, it doesn't tend to rub off on your hands as much once it cures. It doesn't tend to wipe off of the figure. It's a pretty good quality paint pen in my estimation. Now, I know there are people that are going to say, why would you use paint pens? Get this or that. And I'm going to talk about some higher end stuff in just a few minutes. But I wanted to stick to silver, so that's what I would do. I would use a paint pen. Depending on the coverage you want, determines how thick you want it. You really need to leave it a long time to dry without touching it. And I would suggest to you that the paint pen that I use, like I said, it's called Painters, that's what it's called, works really well for me. Maybe your experience will vary, but I can only speak for myself. The other thing to watch out for when you're using silver is that if you get it somewhere that you don't want it, it is something that you want to try and remove and rub off with some paper towel or maybe some sort of wet like cleaning wipe or something immediately, because it can really kind of smear. It can sort of leave I won't say a stain. It leaves more of an unexpected sheen on a certain area that will stand out. I had the problem with doing it with this guy. I had some that got on my fingers, and I ended up getting it up here on his door, and I was very nervous that now I was going to have this kind of, highlighted section on his door. Luckily, that's not what happened. I managed to get it off, but I went at it immediately, and that would be my advice to you as well. Get at it immediately to get it off, and you're going to have to scrub it a little bit, I'm not going to lie. But silver can bring great results. That being said, I also used gold up here on this guy, and I used a gold paint pen. Again, I find that gold doesn't have the issues that silver does. It tends to dry a lot easier. I've had a couple of different, again, paint pens that I've used for gold. You can usually put those on pretty light. Again, I would do a bit of a streak, and I would use a brush for fine tuning it. I've even had times where I will honestly get a piece of paper. Now, if you got a color palette for mixing and whatnot, like actual proper paint palette, that's better. But if worse comes to worse, even a piece of paper, and you see there's a bit of older paint on here now, put it on there. Dip your brush in it and brush it onto the figure. I don't know if that's what they call dry brushing or not, but I find that works really well. Again, this is for beginners, for novices. I'm going to talk a little bit about some higher end stuff in the next section, but yeah, that's kind of the story with silver. You need one that cures well. You might have to do some trial and error. I know what works for me. I've told you what works for me. And be careful when you're using it not to get it on sections of the figure that you actually don't want that color on, or that shade, whatever you want to call silver. Silver's a color, right? Right? Silver's a color, right? Anyway, we're going to go into the final section, which is going to be a little bit of a talk about paint, and I'm going to kind of show you what it is I do. Okay, so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what I wanted to look at here. Now, before I begin, let me just say that I realize that there are a lot of ways to do this stuff. I've mentioned that there are certainly more professional, high-end ways to do it. For example, when I talked about the cutting of plastic and labels, I mentioned the scissors and the crafting knife that I use. Naturally, you could use, like I said, a rotary tool that is fantastic. If you don't own one, these other things are probably around your house. They're certainly a nice, cheap option. When it comes to actual paints, there is a train of thought, and honestly, I get the train of thought, and I agree with the train of thought, that you should have a figure, dismantle him basically. If there's pins, take them out. If there's hinges, take them apart. You wash everything down in soapy water to get the residue off of it that they coat them with, apparently, to make the joints move better. Do each one individually. If you have like an airbrush, hey, use that. If you're going to be brushing, have several different sizes and types of brushes. Make sure that you put a primer on first so that the paint will adhere better. Do each individual section. There's dry brushing for certain looks. There's using water mixed with your paints. There's the argument of, do you use enamel or do you use acrylic? I would advise using acrylic. Enamel is trickier to work with. I think you really want to be experienced if you're going to work with enamel. Acrylic is just easier. It dries quicker. It's just easier to work with, especially for a novice. There's trains of thought that'll say, after everything dries, then and only then should you put it back together. There are people out there that will use markers and pens and stuff. All that is options. But there's a middle road where if you're not looking to make a big investment and you don't want to invest in higher end model paints like Testors or Citadel, there are other options out there. Not to say that those higher end products aren't great. They are. There's no doubt about it. But especially if you're inexperienced, you might not want to go to that extreme. I am in the middle, experienced. I've done a few commissions for people. I've done a lot of my own work, a lot of trial and error along the way. For example, dealing with the clear plastic. And also, I didn't mention this in that section, but with clear plastic, if it's a hinged section, avoid putting paint on hinges of clear plastic, a lot of times it'll just break them down. I made the mistake of using paint on the hinges of the tailpiece for my Age of Extinction Snarl figure. The tail just crumbled and I had to go buy a new one and apply the paint more strategically and lightly. But now we're going to this guy. I had this FOC Jazz, Fall of Cybertron Jazz right there, that I did a custom paint job on. I looked at Jazz in full in episode 103. I looked at the custom work I did on him in episode 271, and at the end of that at the end of that video, I had the unfortunate mishap of his arm breaking off. After about 5 years of having him, I've used him in Universal Collision. I guess it just kind of got weak over time. Now, I'm going to lay this back here, and I'm going to lay him back here. You can see right there where it broke off. The plastic sheared off. It's unfortunate. It's something to watch out for if you have this mold. And I debated, would I replace him with the same one or replace him with another version, or what I would do. Thanks to Pat, shout out there to him. I was able to score this guy, who actually has better joints than my original. So I thought that I would do the same sort of paint job on this guy that this guy had, because I actually got a lot of praise for this, and people said you made that Jazz look very G1 and look a lot better than he does here. So obviously it was a success. It's just too bad that what happened happened. So that being said, where do you begin with all this? Where do you start? Well, here's a couple of early things. Yes, you do want a few paintbrushes. You don't need anything expensive. None of mine are. They're all pretty cheap. In terms of the paints that I would recommend using, early on, again, if you're really into customizing models and whatnot, go for the higher end. You might even have them. If not, stick to things that are, only going to run you $1 or $2. Brands like Americana or Craftsmart or Folk Art. Now I know as soon as I say things like that, people are going to, jump on me for it. I'm not advocating for any of them. I'm technically reviewing all of them. I find those to be good for beginners. I find those to be suitable for people intending to paint these and then just put them on their shelf, probably never to be touched again. I use them, and guess what? I use all of my figures in stop motion, so I'm handling them regularly, and I don't have the paint wear off or anything like that. People will say if you use these cheaper paints, you're going to have to get some sort of a sealer to go over them, or it's going to come off. I don't use a sealer. You can. Like I said, there's a train of thought that says, take them apart, put primer on each piece, use an airbrush, and then paint each piece. When it dries, put it together, put a sealer on it. That's probably the best way to do it, but that is running you the cost of that, that sealer, of more high-end paints, of an airbrush. You don't need that. You're a beginner, or I assume you're a beginner, or only semi into it. And there's a lot of advice and a lot of things you can do. So I'm pointing out what works for me. I will tell you I'll tell you this now. All of this that's on him is cheap paint. It's a lot of it. So it did cost me a bit, but I have black down on the legs and a gray. I have red here, blue on his eyes, black on his arms and his head, of course, black kind of on, you can't really see it here, but on what would be his window sections. So yes, you do need to invest in picking up the products and whatnot, but it doesn't need to run you an arm and a leg to do it. So that being said, where do we begin? Taking the broken one out of it, because that's going to kind of be what this guy will look like in the end, except better. Let's hope. So where do we begin? Well, I said you don't need to run them under hot water and stuff, and really you can. It's a good idea, but you don't have to. Honestly, you can just take a napkin, and I'm actually going to take his blaster off of his arm here. You just take a napkin, give him a quick little wipe over. That works, again, for me. You may have different experience, and if you do, hey, good on you. There, just as easy and as quick as that. Nothing major, nothing outlandish. I find that just like with transformations, it's easier if we start with the simplest stuff first. But I'm going to do it a little bit different here. I'm going to take a second, I'm going to put this guy in vehicle mode, and we're going to start with the vehicle section first, because I think that there's a couple of little tricky areas there that I would just as soon get out of the way as early as possible. But when I began with the other one, I honestly started with the red on his bumper. So give me a second, we'll put him in vehicle mode and then we'll get started. And here we are with him in vehicle mode. Now, a little bit bare bones in places. I'm gonna say the blue is a lovely blue that's on him. It kind of kills me having to paint some of it over, but if I want to get the look that I want to get, it has to be done. We're going to do a number of things here, actually. I want to fill in the front grille and the 4 headlights. I want to paint the bumper red. I want to put some black on the sides here. It'll kind of match the molding that's there, to be honest with you. And we'll do the, I guess we'll call them the tail lights. That's what I've always sort of interpreted them as. So the easiest way I can think of to start is probably with the red, and I'm going to use a paint pen for the red. It's an acrylic paint pen. It's pretty easy to use, to be honest with you, because we have raised sections here, or in the case of the bumper, we just have a front section that is really kind of just ready to go. So, that being the case, I should just be able to take this and paint it on. Light stroke, you can see here I'm starting with the red, just a light stroke to get it on. And now you can see the bumper is done, the tail lights are done. These were just raised sections. I took the paint pen and just went over the raised sections a few times. Really what I did was stick with the molding that was already there. And already I think that this is looking really exponentially better than what we had. Next, we're going to deal with a little bit of black. On this front section here, we have 3 basically molded in pieces up here, in the middle, and down here. I'm going to paint the middle molded in piece black. And there's molding on the sides where the window should be. I'm going to paint that in black. The challenge, however, with painting that in black is avoiding this white here. You could get a piece of paper, or if you have painter's tape, put it there, or even something like, I don't know, clear tape or masking tape, something like that, that could just cover that to make sure that you don't get the black on it. And you're going to have to use a brush for it. I tried using a toothpick for it. It did not work very well. A very fine tip brush will work best for this. If you absolutely don't have a fine tip brush, then hey, be very careful with your hand and do the best you can. By the way, and I didn't say this in the beginning, but I'll say it now. I find that the best acrylic paints usually to use, and the most durable usually, are gloss paints. Now and then satin paints are okay, but a lot of times with a satin finish I find it's dull and I find it scratches off really easy. So I would largely avoid satin paints. I would stick to ones that just say acrylic paint and kind of give you a sort of a matte finish, but I wouldn't specifically look for a matte finish paint because that could be hit or miss. Or I would stick with glass. And a lot of people don't like the extra shine the glass gives, but I think I kind of do. Sometimes you even mix them. For example, with Blur, I mixed a paint that was a light blue metallic with just a paint that was called blue. And I mixed them together, and he does have kind of a flake finish now in the light blue parts on him. You can see that, like I said, in episode 271. But I think that it worked out really well. So don't be afraid to mix paints. I mean, I mixed paints for, you know, the foot of Bruticus right here. This was sort of a brown and a green that I had that I mixed together to give that olivey, browny, weird color that Brawl had for a foot. So I mean, you can do that. I originally had a satin finish gray on Vortex with clear coat nail polish. Actually, I replaced it with the gloss gray. I like it, but you know, to each their own. Obviously, I like it. It is more durable. I looked at Vortex in full in episode 80. I looked at my custom Bruticus, actually all of my custom Combaticons, and compared them with the FOC Combaticons in episodes 78 to 83. So what would you use a toothpick for? Well, before I go any further here, let me show you a couple of things I would use a toothpick for. On my, let's see if I can get this. See if I can get this in a position where you can see it at least relatively well. On my Hegemon, who I looked at in episode 133. See if I can bring this in. I hope that you can see it. If you look at his face, you'll notice I gave him, you know, black in the mouth, in his eyes, those little triangle sections up under his helmet. I did all of that using black with a toothpick. Is it perfect? Probably not, but for as close as the naked eye can see him, it's about as good as I think you're going to get. The other one that I used a toothpick on, and I'm not sure when this is going up, so the review might already be up, it might not, but can I... Let's do this. Get that down and get this taken care of, and I'll take this off. Is the Masterpiece Spike that comes with MPB. This guy has a very small head that was painted the same as the rest of them, and the eyes were just flesh colored so weird. So I took a toothpick and put some white in there and used black to put a little pupil in there. It's not perfect, but with such a small area, you really needed to use something very, very little like that. And at least now the guy does have eyes. It would have been nice to put color in there like blue, but it's too small to work with in that manner. Okay, so next we're going to get into the black on Jazz, our ongoing project. Okay, so we got all of the black done in the vehicle mode now. You know, along the sides here for windows, and up here kind of like a windshield type of thing. Obviously this is Cybertronian inspired, and of course the red was already done. This is kind of what we have in this mode now. The only other thing really worth noting here is that you basically, you know, get a blob of black paint, a brush, you put it on relatively thick. You could do a couple of coats. I opted to put it on relatively thick instead of doing multiple coats, but that's really up to you. If you go out over molded sections, assuming you're using that as I did, or you don't want it to go right up to the roof, basically you gauge yourself with the brush as best you can. You could tape it off possibly. if it goes out over the molding, like up near the front here as I did, a good way to remove it, honestly, is either your fingernail or our trusty handy dandy toothpick. It's a great way to kind of scrape off the excess, but you want to do it, of course, really before it dries. Give it a few minutes so that's a little bit tacky, and then kind of take it off from there. So that's what we have in vehicle mode. Next we're going to do the silver. Inside the grill, really the best thing to use is a brush. The headlights, honestly, again, a toothpick works really well. You can't really take the silver paint stick and do it completely because we're dealing with a relatively small area again here. So I'll get the silver ready and I'll kind of show you what we're doing with that when I'm good to go. Okay, so since I can't really use the paint pen in full, I put a blob of it here. I'll probably end up adding to it. I honestly lay it down, I fill up an end of the toothpick with it, and I take that end of the toothpick and I'm going to go in over the 4 little headlights. Obviously a fine tip brush would do well with this. Like that and like that. And what you end up with is something that looks kind of like this. Now we're going to do the grill. The grill is a little bit different. You really want to use a brush for it. I have this straight edged one. It's not a big brush. I'm going to fill up both sides of it with silver. You see that it always kind of has some silver on it. Yes, I do wash it off, but I don't worry about getting it off because I only use this brush for silver. So we're going to fill that brush up, and I'm going to basically stick it in through the holes and mush it around to fill in the grill, and I'll show you the final result now in just a few minutes. And here we are with the front grille painted in silver. I actually added a little bit more silver here than I did on the last one. I thought about adding more on the last one, but I wanted really the full grille area to look silver, so this is our vehicle mode now. And I think it's a little bit better than it was. It's still certainly Cybertronian. I mean, the mold is what it is, but I think it does help to make it pop just a little bit more. We're going to put them in robot mode. We're going to get started with what we have to work on there next. And we're back with him in robot mode. Now there's a few things to have to do here. We're going to put paint on the lower legs, black with some gray. We're going to paint the fists, paint the upper arms, and the head. The easiest to do is definitely going to be the black sections, no doubt. And we're going to do some in around his abdomen and pelvis area. I'm going to deal with his head first. For his head, quite simply put, we're going to color the visor blue and the head itself black. It is easiest to deal with this by approaching it strategically. I would advise that you paint the head first in case you have some black kind of oversplash on the eyes, and then do the eyes. The eyes, either a very fine tipped brush or, again, a toothpick loaded up with paint works well for the eyes. A small brush for the head, and it's probably a good idea to detach the body so you can access the head as much as possible. And it's probably also a good idea to turn the head around and do the back of it first. So I'm going to deal with the head next and get that done and kind of show you what that looks like. And here we are, inching closer. The head is now done in black. The visor is challenging. You really need to do it and let it dry. I did that. I came back here a little bit later and it was dry. I'm going to see if I can just get his arms and legs back a bit here so that you can see the head a little better. Up close, hopefully. That's coming through nicely. Now comes the easy parts. Funny enough, I actually done this guy sort of backwards. I've done his hard parts first because I I wanted to kind of end this on an easy note. So now that we have all of that done, and by the way, the visor was done with a dollop of blue paint and this toothpick, and the black was done with this brush and a dollop of the black. Now, that being said, let's continue on with the black. We're going to put it on his fists, his upper arms, and the lower legs. And basically that's just a matter of taking some on the brush and painting it on. So I'm going to do that right here and keep going with it. It's obviously better if I can take this closer to my face. I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back with those pieces painted, including down kind of in his hand. And then we'll look at the last step of doing this guy, which will be the gray. And I'm back with the upper arms and the fists now painted. He's looking a little more jazz-esque. The arms still move in and out just fine. No problems there. So that's something that you want to check when you paint is joint tolerances after. Make sure that, you know, paint didn't get in around the joint and kind of ruin things for you. So we have the lower body, the legs left to do there, and a bit of gray. So I'm going to do the legs next. Again, I'm just using a dollop of black paint, however big a dollop is, of black paint, and my handy dandy brush. So I'll get to painting the lower legs up. Again, you just fill up your brush with some of that paint, and really you just start going to town. Down bottom. And here we are with the lower legs painted black. I noticed that there's some detailing up here on his thigh. I think I'm going to do some silver there. And next is kind of coloring in the whole pelvis area black. So I'm going to do both of those apps. Take the paint pen, and actually I already kind of made a slight boo-boo. And sometimes this happens when you're doing it. I have some black paint on this section of just above the knee where it's molded. I think I'm actually going to fill that in though, instead of trying to get that black off. I think I'm going to fill that in with a silver touch-up, which I will do there right now. And I mean, there, you know, there's the chisel head of my paint pen. Like that, and like that. There's the silver app added. Straighten these legs kind of out. Just a little pop there above the knee. So I'll get to painting the pelvis black, and we'll come back for the final app. Again, painting the pelvis black is pretty straightforward. You just do the same as we did with the legs, with the arms, with the hands, where you kind of slobber it on. Yeah, that's the word I use, slobber it on. Basically, you just paint it on to the pelvis area until it is fully covered, like the rest here. And we are down to this now. Getting ever closer. We have one area left to do. That is basically his abdomen, and there's on his hips there's little molded details. I'm going to color both of that gray. Now, obviously I'm going to use a different brush for that. If I can get him to stand here now for me. I'm going to use a different brush obviously for that. And the gray that I'm going to use is a gloss gray. It's still acrylic paint. It's a dark gray, though it dries a nice color. And I think that it will serve the purposes that I need here very nicely. The brush I'm going to use for that one is this brush right here. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to put a section of that gray on here, and and basically paint away. And when we come back, we should have a finished product jazz. And here we have, in all of his glory, finished off, once again, FOC Jazz, except of course this one has 2 arms. 2 arms, folks, 2 arms, not one like this poor schmo over here. He has 2. That's basically the process that you go through. There's probably some cleanup that I'll have to do on him as he dries. Of course, you're going to get your hands filthy, but it's not that hard. I didn't use anything special, and I still managed to end up with a custom jazz that is pretty G1 inspired. Certainly, I hope, looks better than before, and hopefully, though I know that this ran kind of long, I hope I've given you some tips and some tricks and some ideas that you can try yourself if you've been thinking about kind of delving into the world of doing some custom work on your own figures. And hopefully, it turns out swimmingly well. Anyway, that's it. What can I say? On a scale of 1 to 10, my review for doing customs, I enjoy it. I like the result. I'm giving it a 10. And in terms of being a hobby and a pastime, I'm giving custom work a 10. It's great. And I guess that's about it. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks for giving me some of your time and kind of seeing the evolution of this guy from before until now. Like I said, hopefully you've learned something, and I look forward to the next time that you and I get together for another visit right here inside the videos.